My name is Maya Hayes. I was 32 years old when my family found out the truth about my sudden disappearance. I remember standing behind the velvet curtain in a Seattle ballroom, looking at 400 corporate executives, crystal chandeliers, black linen, a stage for a national award, a corporate banquet, the exact place I was never supposed to be. My mother was sitting right at the front table. She had absolutely no idea. See, for 3 years my mother told every single relative and friend that I was locked inside a secure psychiatric ward. Uncles sent pitying emails. Aunts prayed for my broken mind. Colleagues offered her their deepest sympathies like my life was a tragedy. But here is the secret she was hiding from them. I had never lost my mind or stepped foot in a hospital, and in exactly 2 minutes, every single person at that table was going to watch the crazy daughter walk onto that stage to accept a massive business award. Welcome back to Quiet Conflict Tales. This is the channel where ordinary people share extraordinary moments of truth, the kind that change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and hit subscribe. Let me go ahead and put this out there. To understand how the floor fell out from under me, you have to understand the ecosystem of our house in Seattle. There was my mother, Eleanor, a high-end contemporary art dealer who measured a person's worth by their zip code and gallery appearances. There was her husband, Richard, a senior wealth manager who treated my mother's opinions like absolute law. Then there was my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was the centerpiece, a heavily funded visionary running a boutique PR agency for luxury wellness brands. And then there was me, Maya, the blind spot. I skipped the university track and got my licensing as an industrial electrician. At our forced Sunday dinners, the table conversation revolved around client retention and country club waitlists. I usually sat at the end, my cuticles stained with machine grease, smelling like ozone and copper wire. Eleanor would spend 40 minutes praising Chloe's new Instagram campaign for organic serums, then glance at me and ask if I was still messing with those cables. She never waited for me to answer. She would take a sip of her Pinot Grigio and pivot right back to Richard. But there was one person who didn't look at my steel-toed boots like they were a disease. My great-aunt Beatrice. She was my grandmother's sister, a retired structural engineer who lived in a damp, brick duplex down in Tacoma. Beatrice had zero patience for Eleanor's social climbing. She wore denim shirts, drank black coffee out of a chipped thermos, and spent weekends showing me how to read electrical schematics on her kitchen table. Sweat and voltage, Maya. They are the only things in this world that can't be faked, she told me one afternoon. It was raining hard, the drops hitting her tin patio roof like buckshot. When I got my journeyman's card, Beatrice gave me a heavy, scratched brass plumb bob. The metal was cold and carried the faint scent of machine oil. "Gravity never lies," she said, pressing the heavy brass into my palm. "And neither do I. I've anchored a safety net for you, kid, because I know exactly who your mother is." I didn't know what she meant financially. I just knew she saw me. Beatrice passed away on a Tuesday at 6:14 p.m., a sudden cerebral aneurysm. I was 26, working 14-hour shifts wiring the new shipping cranes at the Port of Seattle. The funeral was a performance. Eleanor wore a custom black crepe dress and accepted condolences with a perfectly practiced, trembling smile. 4 days later, she asked me to come to the house. She sat across her glass dining table, folded her hands and sighed. "Aunt Beatrice's estate is entirely insolvent, Maya. The state seized the Tacoma duplex to cover her end-of-life care and back taxes. There's nothing left." I didn't argue. My eyes were bloodshot from working the graveyard shift, and my hands were blistered. I trusted my mother because you are supposed to. I didn't ask to see the probate court filings. For the next year and a half I kept my head down. I rented a drafty, $1, $150 a month studio apartment right next to the elevated train tracks. I made $62,000 a year, eating boxed pasta and transferring every spare dollar into a high-yield Capital One savings account. My goal was to buy a small piece of land outside the city limits. Meanwhile, Chloe's lifestyle kept expanding. She showed up to Thanksgiving in a 2025 Porsche Macan. Eleanor had completely gutted her master bathroom, installing imported travertine tile. I figured Chloe's PR agency was hitting record profits. I didn't know Chloe's business was a complete house of cards. About 8 months after Beatrice died, Chloe signed a $85,000 retainer to handle the public relations for a Silicon Valley wellness startup. She didn't put the money into escrow. She transferred it straight into her personal checking account to cover her own spiraling credit card debts and the lease on that Porsche. By the time the startup demanded their marketing materials, the money was gone. They sent a formal cease and desist, followed by a threat from their legal team. refund the $85,000 within 14 days, or they were filing federal wire fraud charges. Chloe wasn't just facing bankruptcy. She was looking at a criminal indictment. I didn't know any of this yet. But one evening, Eleanor closed all the blinds in the living room and called Richard into her home office. The door clicked shut. Inside that office, Richard used his security clearance at the wealth management firm to solve Chloe's problem. Beatrice had left a $110,000 fixed annuity at Fidelity Investments. I was the listed beneficiary, but Eleanor was the executor of the main estate. She received the notification letter. She saw the balance. 3 days later, Richard knocked on my apartment door. It was a Thursday at 8:15 p.m. He never visited my side of town. He stood in my tiny kitchen wearing a sharp gray suit. He opened a leather binder on my laminate counter. "We are finalizing Beatrice's estate taxes," Richard said smoothly. "The state needs your signature on these release forms to close the probate account." I had just finished a 12-hour shift pulling thick copper wire in the freezing rain. My shoulders ached. I wanted to shower and sleep. I looked at the little yellow sticky notes pointing to the signature lines. I didn't read the dense legal paragraphs. I just trusted him. I signed my name 4 times. One of those pages was a formal beneficiary waiver. By signing it, I legally surrendered my rights to the Fidelity annuity, transferring the funds directly into the general estate. Eleanor controlled the general estate. The money moved in 48 hours. Eleanor wired $85,000 straight to the wellness startup's legal team. Chloe's fraud vanished. The remaining $25,000 paid for Eleanor's imported bathroom tiles. I went back to work the next morning, entirely unaware I had just funded their lifestyle. 3 years passed. I was 29. I had saved $22,000 in my Capital One account. I decided it was time to start my own commercial electrical contracting company. I needed a $50,000 small business loan to buy a work van and commercial insurance. I made an appointment with an independent CPA named David in a strip mall in Bellevue. I paid him $150 to organize my financials for the bank application. I sat in a stiff vinyl chair while David clicked his mouse. He pulled my master tax transcript directly from the IRS database to verify my income history. He stopped clicking. He leaned closer to the monitor. "Maya, why didn't you report the Fidelity distribution?" he asked. I stared at him. "What distribution?" David turned his screen toward me. He pointed to a line item from 3 years ago. It was a 1099-R tax form. It showed a $110,000 payout from Fidelity Investments linked directly to my Social Security number. The system showed the money was released, but the federal taxes were never paid. I owed the IRS over $28,000 in back taxes and penalties for money I never saw. The room got very quiet. I heard the hum of the cheap fluorescent lights above us. I asked David to print the transcript. I drove straight to the main Fidelity branch in downtown Seattle. I gave the manager my driver's license and asked for the original transfer records. She handed me a printed folder 10 minutes later. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and looked at the papers. I saw the beneficiary waiver I had signed in my kitchen. I saw the routing number where the $110,000 went. It was Eleanor and Richard's joint checking account. I didn't call them. I drove straight to Eleanor's contemporary art gallery in Pioneer Square. It was 2:30 p.m. The gallery was empty, bright, and silent. Eleanor was standing near a modern metal sculpture. Richard was sitting on a white leather bench, drinking an espresso. I walked in and dropped the Fidelity folder onto the front reception desk. The papers slid out. Eleanor looked at the IRS transcript. She didn't gasp. She didn't apologize. She just smoothed her silk blouse. "Your sister made a simple accounting error," Eleanor said, her voice completely flat. "She was facing jail time, Maya. We had to act quickly." Richard stood up. "Beatrice was not thinking clearly when she left that to you. It was family money. We simply reallocated it to protect the family name. They didn't see it as stealing. They saw me as a backup bank account." I didn't yell. I didn't push the metal sculpture over. I realized then that I meant absolutely nothing to them. I turned around and walked out the glass doors. I went back to my apartment. I broke my lease that night. I packed my clothes, my hand tools, and Beatrice's brass plumb bob into my truck. I blocked Eleanor, Richard, and Chloe on my phone. The next morning at 5 a.m., I got on Interstate 90 and drove south until I hit Austin, Texas. I crossed the Texas state line at 2 p.m. the next day. The dashboard thermometer in my truck read 101 degrees. Austin was completely different from Seattle. It was bright, loud, and expanding in every direction. I found a $65 a night Super 8 motel right off Interstate 35. The air conditioner rattled in the window, and the carpet smelled like industrial bleach. I unpacked my 2 duffel bags and set Beatrice's brass plumb bob on the cheap laminate nightstand. That was my entire life. It took me 4 days to get hired. I walked onto a massive dirt lot 20 miles east of the city where a company called Apex Solar Solutions was building a 300-acre commercial solar farm. I showed the site manager my Washington journeyman's license. He handed me a hard hat, a neon vest, and a starting wage of $32 an hour. Here is what I didn't know while I was pulling thick black copper cables in the blistering Texas sun. I didn't know what Eleanor was doing back in Seattle to explain the empty chair at the family dinners. The first person to ask about me was Uncle Arthur. He was Richard's older brother, a retired high school principal who actually liked me. He called Eleanor 3 weeks after I left. He had tried to call my cell, but my number was already disconnected. Eleanor could have told Arthur the truth. She could have said I moved away. Instead, she took a breath, let her voice shake perfectly, and told a lie that completely erased my credibility. Maya had a severe psychological break, Arthur, Eleanor said softly. The manual labor, the stress, she lost her grip on reality. Richard and I had to intervene. We placed her in a long-term residential psychiatric facility in Oregon. Arthur was stunned. A psychiatric facility? Is she okay? She is resting in a secure ward, Eleanor lied. The doctors said it is a complete mental collapse. We are paying out of pocket for her care. It has drained us, but we just want her mind to heal. Please, keep this quiet. Of course, the family did not keep it quiet. Within 2 weeks, the entire extended family knew. Chloe told her friends I had gone crazy. Richard confirmed it to his golf partners. Eleanor controlled the narrative perfectly. If I was locked in a psychiatric ward with a broken mind, it explained why I wasn't around. More importantly, it meant if I ever came back and tried to tell people they stole $110,000 from me, nobody would believe a word I said. I was the crazy daughter. They were the tragic, supportive parents. The sympathy cards started arriving at Eleanor's art gallery within a month. Pale blue envelopes, letters written in cursive. Dear Maya, praying for your peace of mind. Dear Maya, there is no shame in a mental breakdown. Eleanor kept every single card. She stacked them inside the bottom drawer of her sleek reception desk. She never tried to find me. My first 6 months in Austin were exhausting. I worked 6 days a week, from 5 a.m. until the sun went down. My skin turned brown from the dirt and the heat. I ate gas station sandwiches on the tailgate of my truck for lunch. At night, I sat on the edge of my motel bed and held Beatrice's brass plumb bob. The metal was heavy and solid. It reminded me that I was real, even when I felt completely invisible. By October, the Apex Solar project hit a massive wall. The central inverters, the huge machines that convert the solar energy into usable grid power, kept overheating and shutting down. Every time a grid failed, the company lost $15,000 a day in contract penalties. The lead engineers from corporate flew in from Chicago. They stood around in clean button-down shirts, looking at blueprints, arguing about software glitches. I was up on a steel platform, 50 feet away, replacing a blown fuse. I looked down at the trench layout. I saw the problem. It wasn't a software issue. It was a thermal bottleneck. They had bundled the high-voltage lines too tightly in the underground PVC pipes. The heat had nowhere to go. I waited until the Chicago engineers went to their rental cars for lunch. I walked into the main construction trailer. The regional project director, a tired man named Vance, was rubbing his temples at his desk. You need to dig up the main junction trench, I told him. Vance looked up. Who are you? I'm the electrician working Sector 4, I said. Your high-voltage lines are choking each other. You need to separate the DC runs by at least 14 inches and install passive ventilation grates at the junction boxes. The heat will dissipate naturally. Your inverters won't trip. I took a black Sharpie and drew the new wiring schematic right on his whiteboard. I didn't use big words. I just showed him the math. Vance stared at the whiteboard for 2 full minutes. The trailer was dead quiet except for the hum of the window AC unit. How fast can you retrofit the primary trench? Vance asked. Give me 4 guys and an excavator, I said. I'll have it done by Sunday night. Vance gave me the crew. We spent the next 48 hours tearing open the baked Texas clay. The air smelled like hot dust and diesel exhaust from the cat excavator. My hands were covered in thick black mud. We ripped out the cramped PVC pipes, laid down wide concrete channels, and separated the thick copper cables exactly 14 inches apart. We bolted heavy steel ventilation grates over the junction pits. Sunday night at 8:15 p.m., Vance stood in the main control trailer. He grabbed the massive steel breaker switch and pulled it down. It made a loud, heavy clunk. We watched the digital monitors on the wall. The temperature gauges usually spiked into the red zone within 10 minutes. This time they stayed completely green. The heat was venting naturally. The grids held perfectly. Vance exhaled. He walked over to his desk, pulled out a company checkbook, and wrote me a direct bonus for $12,000. "You shouldn't be pulling wire for $32 an hour, Maya," Vance said, handing me the paper. "Get your Texas master license. Start your own LLC. When you do, call me. I have 3 more solar farms breaking ground next year, and I need a lead contractor who actually understands physics." I took the check. I went back to my motel room, set Beatrice's brass plumb bob on the desk, and started filling out the state business registration forms online. I named the company True North Electrical. The next 2 years were a complete blur of isolation and relentless work. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near the highway. I didn't go to bars. I didn't make friends. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., drank black coffee, and drove my used Ford Transit van to construction sites all over Central Texas. I hired 2 guys, then 6, then 14. By my 3rd year in Austin, True North Electrical had a fleet of 6 trucks and was pulling in $1.8 million in gross annual revenue. I was 32 years old. I owned my own house in the suburbs. I still kept Beatrice's brass plumb bob on my office desk, right next to my computer monitor. It anchored me. Then came Tuesday, November 12th, at 10:14 a.m. I was sitting in my air-conditioned office, reviewing a supply invoice, when my desk phone rang. My office manager had transferred a call from the main line. I picked up the receiver. "This is Maya." There was heavy, jagged breathing on the other end. Then, a shaky voice. "Maya? Is it really you?" I froze. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Uncle Arthur. "Uncle Arthur?" I asked. My hand gripped the plastic phone receiver so tightly my knuckles turned pale. "Oh my God," Arthur choked out. He sounded like he was crying. "The private investigator was right. You are in Texas. You have a business." I sat up straight. "What private investigator? What are you talking about?" Arthur took a deep, rattling breath. He explained everything in a rushed, panicked voice. His wife, Aunt Sarah, had passed away a month ago. In her will, she left $5,000 to every niece and nephew. Arthur wanted to mail me my check. He called Eleanor to get the exact mailing address for the psychiatric facility in Oregon where she claimed I was locked up. "Your mother gave me a name. The Willamette Valley Care Center," Arthur said, his voice breaking. "I called the main desk to ask about their mail policy for patients. They told me they had absolutely no record of Amaya living there. They never had a patient by that name." I stared at the brass plumb bob on my desk. The room felt completely still. "I panicked, Maya," Arthur continued. "I thought you were missing. I thought you were dead and your mother was just covering it up out of shame. I paid a private investigator $800 to search your social security number. He found your commercial electrical license in the Texas State Registry yesterday. He gave me this phone number. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the hum of the AC vent above me." "Maya," Arthur whispered, "your mother told all of us you had a total mental collapse. She said you lost your mind. She told the whole family you were living in a secure psychiatric ward. We have been praying for your sanity for 3 years." The puzzle pieces snapped together in my head with brutal clarity. Eleanor didn't just invent the psychiatric ward story to explain why I didn't come to Thanksgiving dinner. She built a firewall. If I was a certified psychiatric patient who had lost touch with reality, then nothing I said mattered. If I ever drove back to Seattle and stood in front of the family, screaming that Eleanor and Richard stole $110,000 from me, nobody would believe me. They would just look at me with pity. They would shake their heads and say, "Look at her. She is sick. Her mind is broken just like Eleanor said." The lie protected the theft funded the lie. It was a perfect, sealed loop. "I'm not crazy, Uncle Arthur," I said, my voice completely flat and steady. "I never was." Arthur went silent on the phone. I could hear his heavy, jagged breathing through the speaker. "Uncle Arthur, do you have your computer turned on?" I asked. "Yes," he whispered. "I am sitting at my desk. I am going to send you an email. Open it while we are on the phone." I put my phone on speaker, clicked open my files, and attached the PDF scans of the IRS 1099-R form and the forged Fidelity beneficiary waiver. I hit send. A minute later, I heard the sharp click of his computer mouse. I waited. I heard the rustle of his jacket as he leaned closer to his screen. "Look at the date on the Fidelity transfer, Uncle Arthur," I said. "And look at the destination routing number. It is Richard and Eleanor's joint checking account." Arthur read the documents. He did the math. The $110,000 transfer happened exactly 3 weeks before Eleanor told the entire family I had suffered a mental collapse. "Oh dear God," Arthur said. His voice was shaking, but this time it was not out of sadness. It was out of pure anger. "She stole your Aunt Beatrice's money. She stole your inheritance, and then she erased you so you could never come back to claim it." "Yes," I said simply. "I am calling her right now," Arthur said, his voice rising. "I am calling Richard. I am emailing this to the whole family." "No, Uncle Arthur," I said quickly. "Do not do that. Maya, they are treating you like a crazy person. They collected sympathy cards for you. And if you show them a piece of paper, Eleanor will just tell everyone I forged it," I explained. "She will say it is proof of my paranoia. She will cry and say my sickness is getting worse. You know exactly how she operates." Arthur stopped talking. He knew I was right. Eleanor was a master at twisting reality. A printed PDF would not break her narrative. I needed something completely undeniable. I needed a mirror she could not look away from. "Just wait," I told him. "Do not say a word to anyone. Let me handle this." I hung up the phone. I looked at the brass plumb bob on my desk. I didn't know how I was going to expose her yet, but my business was growing fast, and I knew my opportunity would come through my work. 3 weeks later, because of my success at the Apex Solar site, my office received a massive bid request. A huge commercial real estate developer called Crescent Holdings was building a 38-story luxury apartment tower in downtown Austin. They needed a master commercial electrical company to handle the entire internal grid. I printed the blueprints. I spent 4 nights sitting at my kitchen table with a calculator and a yellow notepad. I submitted a bid for $3.2 million. 2 weeks later, the lead developer signed my contract. For the next 8 months, my crew and I practically lived inside that concrete tower. We pulled miles of heavy conduit wire. We installed massive industrial breaker panels. The building smelled like wet cement and hot solder. I wore a hard hat and a safety vest every single day. We finished the project 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and we passed every single city inspection on the very first try. The Austin Tower was a massive success for Crescent Holdings, but here was the most important detail. Crescent Holdings was not a Texas company. They were a Seattle-based developer. Their corporate headquarters were located just 3 blocks away from Eleanor's art gallery in Pioneer Square. On a Monday morning at 9:30 a.m., a FedEx courier dropped a thick, heavy envelope on my desk. I opened it. Inside was a thick piece of cardstock with gold, raised lettering. It was a formal invitation. Crescent Holdings was hosting their annual investor and partner banquet. It was scheduled for the second week of December at the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Seattle. There was a handwritten note clipped to the invitation from the CEO of Crescent Holdings. "Maya, your work on the Austin Tower saved us millions in delays. We are naming True North Electrical our National Contractor of the Year. We want you on stage in Seattle to accept the award." I stared at the gold letters. My heart started beating very slowly in my chest. I knew exactly what the Crescent Holdings Investor Banquet was. It was the biggest corporate charity event in Seattle. It was a room filled with developers, corporate lawyers, and senior wealth managers. Richard was a senior wealth manager. His firm managed the investment portfolios for half the executives at Crescent Holdings. Eleanor attended every high society corporate gala in the city to sell her expensive art to rich developers. Chloe went to these events to network for her fake PR agency. They were all going to be there. They thought I was locked in a secure psychiatric ward in Oregon, eating terrible hospital food and losing my mind. They had been telling people that exact story for 3 years. I picked up my phone and called the Crescent Holdings corporate office. "This is Maya," I told the event coordinator. "I am calling to RSVP. I will be flying to Seattle for the banquet. Just 1 ticket for me." I put the phone down on my desk. I had exactly 3 weeks. I didn't call Uncle Arthur to brag. I didn't send angry, cryptic emails to my sister. I just went back to work and kept running my company. On my lunch break the following Tuesday, I drove to a high-end tailor in downtown Austin. I didn't buy a sparkly evening gown to make a dramatic movie star entrance. I bought a sharp, tailored charcoal gray women's business suit. It was structured, professional, and commanded absolute respect. I bought black leather loafers. I booked a first-class flight to Seattle for Thursday, the day before the banquet. I landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on Thursday at 2:45 p.m. The sky was the exact same heavy, wet gray I remembered from 3 years ago. I didn't rent a flashy car. I took a standard taxi to a quiet business hotel a few miles away from the downtown core. I didn't want to accidentally bump into them on the street before the timing was right. I spent Friday afternoon sitting quietly in my hotel room. I ironed the charcoal suit. I drank a glass of ice water. At 5:30 p.m., I took Beatrice's brass plumb bob, unclipped it from my briefcase, and slid it into the inner breast pocket of my suit jacket. The heavy brass pressed solid against my ribs. It felt like armor. I arrived at the Fairmont Hotel at 6:15 p.m. The grand ballroom was massive. There were towering crystal chandeliers, tables draped in thick black linen, and the heavy smell of roasted beef tenderloin and expensive floral centerpieces. Over 400 corporate guests were expected. Because I was receiving a national award, the event staff checked my ID, smiled, and ushered me through a side hallway into a private VIP green room directly behind the main stage. The room had leather couches, bottles of sparkling water, and a flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall showing a live camera feed of the ballroom floor. I stood alone in the back of the green room, drinking water and watching the monitor as the guests started pouring in. At 6:40 p.m., I saw them. They walked through the main double doors. Richard was wearing a custom black tuxedo, immediately shaking hands with the managing partners of his wealth management firm. Chloe walked beside him in a sweeping silver silk dress, scanning the room and trying to network with a group of commercial real estate brokers holding martini glasses. And then there was Eleanor. She wore a floor-length emerald green gown. Her hair was perfectly styled. She held a glass of champagne with 2 elegant fingers. I watched her through the security monitor as she stopped at table 14, right near the front of the stage. A senior executive from Richard's firm walked up to her. I watched the executive put a hand over his heart and give Eleanor a sad, highly sympathetic smile. Eleanor closed her eyes, gave a brave little nod, and gently touched the man's arm in gratitude. I knew exactly what that interaction was. The executive was asking how her sick daughter was doing in the psychiatric facility. Eleanor was playing the tragic, strong mother who was bearing an unbearable, secret burden. She was soaking up the corporate sympathy, totally unaware that the sick daughter she was lying about was standing 40 feet away behind a velvet curtain, holding a multi-million-dollar commercial contract. At 7:15 p.m., the ballroom lights dimmed. The loud chatter of 400 executives faded into a quiet, respectful hum. The CEO of Crescent Holdings, a tall, gray-haired man named Elias Thorne, walked up to the glass podium on the center stage. The microphone gave a sharp whine before he adjusted it. "Good evening, partners, investors and friends," Elias said, his voice echoing through the massive room. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate the people who literally build the future of our cities." I stood in the dark behind the heavy stage curtain. I reached into my jacket pocket and wrapped my fingers around the cold brass of Beatrice's plumb bob. My breathing was slow and completely even. Elias Thorne spent the next 10 minutes talking about the massive success of their 38-story luxury tower in Austin. He talked about how they finished under budget. He talked about the flawless city inspections. Richard was sitting at table 14, sipping his wine, politely clapping for a real estate project he knew absolutely nothing about. "When you build a skyscraper," Elias said into the microphone, leaning forward, "the most critical element is the electrical nervous system. You need a master contractor who does not compromise. You need someone whose integrity is built into the walls." Elias looked down at his presentation cards. "This year, our National Contractor of the Year award goes to the brilliant mind behind True North Electrical. Please direct your attention to the stage of found." I let go of the brass plumb bob. I squared my shoulders. I waited for the heavy curtain to open. "Please direct your attention to the stage, and welcome the founder and CEO of True North Electrical, Maya Hayes." At exactly 7:18 p.m., the heavy velvet curtain pulled back. I stepped out into the harsh, bright glare of the stage spotlights. The soles of my black leather loafers made a quiet, steady sound against the hardwood floor. The applause started. 400 corporate executives clapping in a massive, echoing room. I walked to the center of the stage. Elias Thorne smiled, shook my hand firmly, and handed me a heavy, engraved glass trophy. I turned and faced the room. Directly above me, 2 massive projector screens flashed a live, high-definition video of my face. Every single person in the ballroom could see me perfectly. I placed my hands on the edge of the glass podium. The room was a sea of dark suits and evening gowns, but I found table 14 in exactly 3 seconds. Richard had just taken a sip of his red wine. He froze completely. The glass stopped a few inches from his mouth. His eyes locked onto the massive projection screens above me, and then down to the physical stage. Chloe was holding her cell phone, recording the event for her PR agency's social media. Her hand slowly dropped to the white tablecloth. She stared at me, her jaw physically dropping. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor was sitting between a senior managing partner from Richard's wealth management firm and a high-profile commercial real estate broker. When she saw my face on the screen, Her entire body went completely rigid. All the color drained from her face in an instant. She looked like all the air had been violently sucked out of her lungs. Her fingers gripped the thin glass stem of her champagne flute so tightly that her knuckles turned stark white. They were staring at the daughter they had told everyone was locked in a secure psychiatric ward in Oregon. Only I wasn't wearing a hospital gown. I was wearing a sharp custom charcoal business suit, standing at a glass podium, holding a national corporate award. I leaned close to the microphone. "Thank you, Elias," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and carried perfectly through the massive ballroom speakers. And thank you to the entire team at Crescent Holdings. The room went completely quiet to listen. 2 years ago, I started my company in Texas with a single work van and a very clear lesson I learned right here in the Pacific Northwest, I said, looking directly down at table 14. My great-aunt Beatrice was a structural engineer in Tacoma. She taught me that you cannot fake a strong foundation. You either put in the honest work, or the structure eventually collapses. Richard swallowed hard. I saw his shoulders stiffen from 40 feet away. We wired 38 stories in Austin, I continued, scanning the rest of the room. We did it on time, under budget, and with absolute transparency. In this industry, the truth is in the schematics. The math never lies. Thank you for recognizing our hard work tonight. I didn't yell. I didn't point my finger. I didn't accuse them of stealing $110,000 on a hot microphone. I didn't need to do any of that. The sheer fact that I existed on that stage was enough to destroy them. The entire ballroom erupted in loud applause. The senior managing partner sitting right next to Eleanor clapped loudly, then leaned over and whispered something to Richard. I could read his lips on the security monitor. He asked, "Hayes? Richard, isn't that your daughter?" Richard looked like he was going to be physically sick. The lie was sitting right there at the table with them, and it was starting to crack open in front of his boss. I smiled politely, nodded to Elias, and walked off the stage. But I didn't go back to the VIP green room behind the curtain. I walked straight down the side carpeted stairs and directly onto the main ballroom floor. I kept my back straight. I held the glass trophy in my left hand. I felt the heavy weight of Beatrice's brass plumb bob resting in the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I walked straight down the center aisle, directly toward table 14. I reached table 14 exactly as the applause died down. The clinking of heavy silverware against porcelain plates started echoing across the ballroom. Richard's boss, the senior managing partner, was a man named Harrison. He stood up from his chair as I approached. He had a wide, genuine smile on his face. He looked at me, then looked down at Richard and Eleanor. "Richard, you didn't tell me your daughter was the guest of honor," Harrison boomed, his voice carrying over the soft jazz music playing from the stage. "This is incredible." Richard stood up slowly. His custom tuxedo suddenly looked too tight around his collar. He didn't reach out to hug me. He didn't even extend his hand. A thin layer of sweat broke out on his forehead under the ballroom lights. "Yes," Richard managed to say. His voice sounded like it was being pushed through gravel. "It is a surprise." I held out my free hand to Harrison. "Maya Hayes," I said. "It is very nice to meet you." Harrison shook my hand firmly. "Harrison Cole, your parents have talked about you, but Eleanor told me earlier this evening that you were dealing with some severe health issues down in Oregon. She said you were in a long-term care facility." Harrison looked confused. He gestured to my sharp charcoal suit and the heavy glass award in my hand. "You certainly don't look sick. Did the doctors misdiagnose you?" The silence at table 14 was absolute. Chloe stared down at her untouched prime rib, her phone resting face down on the tablecloth. Eleanor was breathing so shallowly her chest barely moved. She was completely trapped. She was sitting in the middle of a $500 a plate corporate banquet, surrounded by her husband's wealthy clients, and the lie she had fed them for 3 years was standing right in front of her. "Oregon?" I asked. I kept my voice light, conversational. I looked directly at Eleanor. "No, Harrison. I have never been to a hospital in Oregon. I have lived in Austin, Texas for the past 3 years. I've been building my commercial electrical firm, working 60-hour weeks. I am completely healthy." Harrison frowned. He looked down at Eleanor. "Eleanor, you told my wife at the charity auction last month that Maya had a total mental collapse." Eleanor opened her mouth. Her perfectly applied lipstick parted, but no sound came out. She looked at Richard for help, but Richard was staring intently at the carpet. "I think my mother just struggles to explain my career choices to her friends," I said calmly. "It is easier to say your daughter is locked in a psychiatric ward than to admit she wears steel-toed boots and pulls copper wire for a living." Harrison's eyes widened. He was a smart corporate executive. He instantly recognized the toxic, humiliating dynamic. He looked at Eleanor with sudden, undisguised disgust. "Well," Harrison said, his tone dropping the polite corporate warmth, "your work on the Crescent Tower is exceptional, Maya. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said. I looked down at Eleanor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I hope you enjoy the rest of the dinner, Eleanor," I said quietly. "It is a beautiful event." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned around and walked away from table 14. I walked straight out the main double doors of the ballroom, through the hotel lobby, and out into the cool, damp Seattle night. I didn't stay for the dessert course. I didn't stay for the networking hour. I got into a taxi, drove back to my hotel, and packed my charcoal suit into my suitcase. The next morning, I flew back to Texas. I went right back to work. I didn't have to wait long to hear the fallout. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Uncle Arthur. He didn't sound panicked this time. He sounded like a man who had just watched a building implode from a safe distance. "Maya," Arthur said, "what did you do?" "I accepted an award," I said. "Why?" "Richard's boss, Harrison Cole, called me," Arthur said. "He and I golf at the same club. Harrison told me you showed up at the Crescent Holdings banquet. He said you owned the company that wired their new skyscraper." "That is correct," I said. Arthur let out a sharp bark of laughter. "Harrison also told me that Eleanor tried to claim you were in a psychiatric ward right to his face, just minutes before you walked onto the main stage. The rumor is spreading through Richard's wealth management firm like wildfire. Nobody trusts a financial advisor who lies to his own boss about his daughter's sanity." "What about the rest of the family?" I asked. "I didn't even have to send the IRS transcript," Arthur said. "Chloe posted a video on her Instagram story from the banquet table. She deleted it 10 minutes later, but your cousin Sarah screen recorded it. Sarah saw you on that stage. The entire family is calling Eleanor's house right now. Nobody is answering the phone." "Nobody is answering the phone," Arthur repeated. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at my kitchen island in Austin. It was 6:45 a.m. I drank my black coffee and looked at the heavy brass plumb bob sitting on my counter. The lie was officially broken. Eleanor could no longer hide behind the fake psychiatric ward story. But I still had a massive financial problem anchored to my name. The social humiliation was done, but the math was not fixed. The federal government still thought I owed $28,450 in back taxes for the $110,000 fidelity payout I never received. I didn't call Eleanor to demand the money back. I didn't want a check from them. I just wanted my name completely scrubbed from their theft. I opened my laptop and called my CPA, David, back in Washington. "Send me the federal fraud reporting forms," I told him. 10 minutes later, David emailed me IRS Form 3949A. It is the official federal document used to report suspected tax fraud and stolen identity. I printed the 4 pages. I filled out every box using a black pen. I attached the printed PDF of the forged beneficiary waiver. I attached the bank routing numbers showing the $110,000 going directly into Richard and Eleanor's joint checking account. David called me back just as I was scanning the finished documents into my computer. "Maya," David said, his voice very serious, "I need you to understand what happens when I hit submit on this portal. If we file this, it triggers an automatic criminal tax audit on the receiving bank account." "I know," I said. "Richard is a licensed wealth manager," David warned. "He holds a Series 7 federal financial license. The second the IRS opens an active wire fraud and tax evasion investigation on his personal accounts, they notify the Securities and Exchange Commission. His firm will suspend his license immediately. It is an automatic federal regulation." I looked out my kitchen window. I watched my neighbor back his truck out of his driveway. "Submit the form, David," I said. I closed my laptop. I grabbed my work boots, got into my van, and drove to my job site. 3 weeks passed. It was early January. The temperature in Austin dropped to 42 degrees, a cold, damp morning. I was sitting in the cab of my work truck at 11:30 a.m., eating a turkey sandwich and reviewing a supply invoice on my steering wheel. My cell phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown Seattle number. I pressed accept and put the phone on the dashboard mount. "This is Maya. Maya, you need to pull the IRS report." It was Richard. He was not using his smooth, polished corporate voice. He was breathing heavily. He was talking fast, the words stumbling over each other. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was doing. "The compliance office at my firm just pulled my security badge 2 hours ago," Richard said. His voice was rising in panic. "They suspended my Series 7 license pending a federal audit. I cannot legally trade. I cannot access my client accounts. I am locked out of my own office." I watched a forklift move a heavy wooden pallet of steel conduit pipes across the dirt lot outside my windshield. I chewed my sandwich. I didn't say anything. Chloe's PR agency completely folded last week because her clients saw the video from the banquet. Richard kept talking, his panic turning into desperation. She is going to lose her apartment. Eleanor is completely frozen. She will not leave the house. Uncle Arthur sent the fidelity documents to the entire extended family. We are completely isolated. You ruined us, Maya. You need to call the IRS right now and tell them it was a family misunderstanding. I listened to the hum of my truck's heater. I remembered the night he stood in my tiny kitchen, wearing his sharp gray suit, and pointed to the signature lines on the paperwork. I remembered how tired my hands were, and how I signed away my safety net because I trusted the man standing in my house. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Richard, I said. My voice was completely flat. It was $110,000. We had to save your sister, Richard pleaded. We had to protect the family. You protected a criminal by stealing from an electrician, I said. And you left me with the tax bill. The math is catching up to you. I reached out and pressed the red button on my phone screen. The call ended. I didn't block the number. I just put the phone down, finished my sandwich, and went back to work. Richard left me 6 frantic voicemails over the next 48 hours. I didn't listen to a single one. I simply deleted them from my phone and let the federal government handle the conversation. The process was slow, but it was absolutely relentless. By the second week of March, a formal letter arrived in my mailbox from the Internal Revenue Service. It was printed on heavy, off-white paper. The auditor had reviewed the forged fidelity transfer documents and the bank routing numbers. The letter stated that my Social Security number was officially cleared of the $28,450 tax debt. The IRS transferred the entire balance, plus an additional $14,200 in severe fraud penalties, directly to Richard and Eleanor. The financial investigation was the final blow to their carefully crafted ecosystem. Because the IRS flagged the forged beneficiary waiver as criminal wire fraud, the Securities and Exchange Commission formally and permanently revoked Richard's Series 7 license. He was permanently banned from the financial sector. He couldn't trade, he couldn't advise, and he couldn't manage a single dollar of wealth. His career simply ceased to exist. Eleanor tried to keep her contemporary art gallery open, but in the Seattle high society world, your social reputation is your only currency. Once the wealthy developers and investors at Crescent Holdings found out she had stolen her own daughter's inheritance to cover up a felony, the invitations stopped. Nobody wanted to be seen drinking champagne in her gallery. Nobody bought her paintings. The gallery quietly closed its doors on a Tuesday in late May. Chloe, completely cut off from her parents' funding and facing the total collapse of her fake PR agency, was forced to move out of her luxury downtown loft. I didn't celebrate any of this. I didn't feel a sudden rush of triumphant joy. I just felt a deep, quiet sense of relief, like setting down a heavy bag I had been carrying for way too long. I am 33 now. I live in a modern, single-story house on the edge of the Texas Hill Country. True North Electrical just signed a massive $4.8 million contract to wire a new commercial transit hub outside of Austin. I have 42 licensed electricians on my payroll. Some evenings when the temperature drops, I sit in the wooden chair on my back porch. I listen to the dry wind rustling through the scrub oaks. I reach into my pocket and pull out Beatrice's brass plumb bob. The brass is scratched and worn, but the weight of it never changes. It is heavy, cold, and perfectly honest. It always points straight down. Beatrice was right about everything. You cannot fake a solid foundation. If a family builds their entire life on lies, status, and using people as spare parts, that structure will eventually collapse under its own weight. You don't have to grab a sledgehammer and knock down the walls yourself. You just have to walk out the front door, build your own life on solid ground, and let gravity do the rest. If the people who were supposed to protect you need you to be broken, silent, or hidden just so their version of reality makes sense, the most powerful thing you can do is stop apologizing for existing. You write your own blueprints, you do the honest work, and you let them sit in the dust of their own choices. If this journey resonated with you, and if you understand the quiet power of walking away to build your own undeniable truth, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sharing these experiences helps others realize they don't have to stay trapped in someone else's narrative.